All right, Dan West again, and I'm currently in a project for a friend of mine making a workbench. He's a ball driller, bowling ball driller. His wife's a professional bowler, and I've got some raised panels that I'm doing on the back and on the ends. And you know, this is what I want to talk about at the little router table. Setting it up. I'm gonna make an extra video just for this. I think it's worthwhile, especially for any of you guys who got shapers and maybe have never thought about this or seen it. Anyone in the industry, you know, you've heard stories of how guys have gotten hurt on various machines. Like I've said before in other videos, when I was in France, a week, if not maybe two at the very most, a girl almost lost all the fingers on her right hand. A year before I retired, the company hired two young ladies out of what we would call apprentice school, and one of the two of them was going to become an assistant foreman, and it was pretty clear to find out which one of the two was probably going to be the most likely candidate. Either way, I always seem to I set the shapers up for both of them. And the one was just so frightened of shapers. We had some pretty big machines. She was too frightened to run them, and you know, she went to school supposedly for all this. And the boss didn't really press it, but the one gal wasn't worried about it. But she still had a hard time understanding how to set a shaper up. So one thing I always did, and I'm probably one of the only guys that did it, was I would always put a piece of MDF in the front of our fences, so that, as you can see here, this is a raised panel bit. Only the knives are exposed out of that panel, and the whole idea being two reasons. First of all, it's very safe. You don't have this big opening here, you know, like you normally do with a shaper or even a router table. And the other thing is, which is secondary, but I think really important, not as important as safety factor, but really good, you have a continuous surface that your workpiece is sliding through. There is no way this thing can Skype or dip or whatever you call it here, you know, where it dips in into the cavity there, the opening. Especially if you're doing like what I like is lock miters. You know, you're running your lock miter flat through the cutter, and the other side you're running it vertical. And even though you have a big sheet of plywood you're pushing it through, or some form, usually this piece is narrower, and it has a chance to turn or dip, you know, or go in. You're really this gives you a lot of area to push against the fence here, as well as having your panel in the back. And again, with this here, the only thing you could be possibly concerned about is if you have a big opening at the bottom, you know, but you know, for your cutter. But usually you have, again, I don't know what they call the rings, you go baguettes. That's what they're called, baguettes, that we can put around the cutter to tighten that opening at the bottom so it doesn't drop down. I want to show you how you do it, and it's good as happening with this situation, because I had a peculiar situation that you may find. Now again, this is raised panels, right? My cutter is so wide that, first of all, you start out by setting your bit in the machine, and with a piece of scrap, you get your cutter set to the height and the depth of the fence. And we're talking about the fence of either your shaper or, in this case, your router table, the actual fence, the wood. Once you get that location, you mark on the table where that fence is, and of course your height's already established. You don't have to touch that, but you mark that fence on the table however you want, where that fence, the face of the fence should end up. Now in this case, when I put my first piece of MDF on it, you have to bring it forward so that it clears the bit completely, and it's fastened to the machine fence solidly, so that when you turn it on, now you can push it into the cutter. I couldn't do it. The fence is the bit is so wide, I couldn't do it. So what I had to do is I had to add an extra piece to the fence itself. I cut a big opening, wide opening, and then I pulled it forward, and then I had the room to put this onto this backer piece without it touching the bit. I had enough room, more enough clearance. So all I did was I had cut a big slot, a big vertical slot for the nut up here. All right, that's all I had, just vertical slot. So then, now with our machines, two were digital and the other three were cranked. Our fences went straight back if we had them to zero. Now you could angle them if you wanted, but ours were made to where they go straight back. I mean, those machines are really something. I worked in shops here in LA, but I'm telling you, table saws, big, huge table saws that were, we had two really big panel saws. I shouldn't say panel, because there was an actual panel saw in another department, and it just got panels. So the thing, the blade just ran across. But we had table saws that you put these big, we call them plaques. We call them sheets of plywood or whatever. Well, they're called plaques of MDF, huge sheets, and they weren't four by 8. They were bigger than that. And somewhere, 45 millimeters, inch and a quarter, inch 3/4, something thick. But you laid them on a table, and that table slides. The table goes through, monster machine. Could handle anything. Big, huge blades with a blade in front to score it if you wanted to. Depends what you're doing. Did a lot of melamine work. So, back to this. So, I was able to, with the extra piece of 3/4 MDF, bring it past the cutter. You turn the machine on, and you keep your eye on your mark here, right? And you push it straight back. And when you get to that mark, maybe go an extra 1/16 of an inch, and then stop the machine. And then bring it back to your mark, cinch it down real tight. The reason being, when you're not cutting something, have that cutter cutting air, not touching or rubbing against the MDF. Even though it's MDF, still, I like it where it's not touching anything. It's just 1/16 of an inch. That's all you need. I'm telling you, that's the best way to go. It's a good habit to get into with everything. I'm sure there's some exceptions, some little exceptions. When you're making dados or something like that, slots, whatever. And you got straight runs. You're making whatever. There's some. But when you're doing something like this, where it's a lock miter, or certainly your raised panels, or you're making some kind of molding. Now you want something really clean and no movement and all that, and it's a little more compound. So give it a thought. Like a friend told me when I was a young man, he said, Danny, he was a machinist. He said, he let me go into the garage and play with his lathe and everything, milling machine. He said, Danny, there's a lot of ways to do anything. I don't care if you're gardening, filing in an office, or you're a chef, or you mow lawns, you're sweeping a factory floor, anything. There's always a lot of ways to do something. But there's usually only one good way to do anything. And he says, life's nothing but habits. Try the best you can to create all your habits into good habits. Pick out the best way to do something and do that, and do it consistently to where it becomes a habit. And you'll work safer, and whatever you're doing, it'll be a lot better. And what more can you ask? It's up to the individual. A lot of times speed kills. There's nothing good about being fast. And by being very, very correct, you'd be surprised how much actual speed you gain because you're not redoing everything. You're not backtracking. You're not taking something apart, or you're not getting hurt. So, that's it. I hope it makes sense to some people and they can use it. And I just want to pass it on to beginners. My videos are for people who maybe just starting out. You've never heard something like this. It's a good way to go, And with that, I hope you have a good day. And if you're going to work in a shop, have a good time in the shop. Work safe. And as always, don't use any putty. Okay? All right. See you on the next one. Bye.